Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here, and today I'm coming at you with a video, and it's going to be regarding a topic that I've been very interested in and been trying to develop a good way to bring it up and have a video about it. But it's going to be about a particular structure of team that a lot of teams replicate in the NBA now, in the NBA in the past, and I've always just found it to be a very unsuccessful way of building a team. But I think oftentimes general managers, players, coaches often think that it is a successful way to build a team. But I'm going to debunk that myth and sort of tell why I maybe think that it isn't a good way of forming a team. So to get started with that, the the whole concept that I'm talking about is the basic concept of having a point guard or very small guard as your primary best player, and along with that having a big man, either a center or a big power forward, as your other best player. So now, like a classic example of this would maybe be Stockton and Malone. So they built their entire team for the duration of their two careers around just those two. Everything went through them. It was a lot of pick and rolls. It was a lot of Stockton dumping it down to Malone in the post and him doing turnarounds and shooting. So I'm just gonna list off a bunch of these duos and tell you a little bit about them quickly and how successful or unsuccessful they were. And then I'm going to get more into why I don't think that this style is successful. So some historical examples would be Allen Iverson and Dikembe Mutombo from around 2000 to 2002 when they got to the finals one of those years. That was Allen Iverson, essentially a point guard at 6'1", even though he played a little bit of off guard, but he was essentially the point guard. And Dikembe Mutombo was the second best player at center. They didn't win any titles together, but were getting out of the East one year and were a playoff contender the other year. Another example would be Wilt and Jerry West in the late 1960s, early 1970s. They were supposed to be a powerhouse that was supposed to take down the Celtics dynasty, which they actually never did. They never beat the Celtics in the playoffs. You would assume that, maybe those guys got about 4 titles together if they played like 5 seasons together. But they only have one title one year when they beat the Knicks in '72. So yeah, that's the first example. Another one would be Oscar Robertson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, at the time Lou Alcindor. They only won one title together, but they weren't together that long, only about 4 years, so you can't really hold that against either of them because they didn't have much time to work with it. Oscar was on his way out and Kareem was on his way into the league at the time. So it's hard to justify that, but they did win a title, but I would almost argue they slightly underachieved in a way. The next the next duo I have on here that a team built around was Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp for Seattle. Got to the finals one year, but didn't win the championship, and were about a second-round team the other years that they were together. A similar duo to that I found was Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, who the Clippers built around for 6 seasons. They never got out of the second round of the playoffs, but were always considered to be either the best or second best team in the West usually, and a few years were considered heavy favorites to really go far in the playoffs, but just never put it together. Another duo from the late 90s that I found interesting, how little they actually accomplished together, was Tim Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning. And they actually were a really good team a few years. In 96 to 97, they won 62 games and lost in the conference finals to the Chicago Bulls and Jordan. And then in 1999, they were the 1 seed in the East and they lost to the 8-seeded Knicks. And so, they had a good regular season a few times, but they just could not put it together in the postseason, so no titles for the two of them together. This next one's a little bit interesting just because I noticed a pattern. So Kevin Garnett on the Timberwolves with at first Stephon Marbury, then after that Terrell Brandon, then after that Chauncey Billups, then after that Sam Cassell. They were always on the Timberwolves in the Kevin Garnett era trying to just get Kevin Garnett and a point guard together. And so it was a revolving door for a while. Marbury, Brandon, Billups, and then Sam Cassell. Each one had played pretty decent, but they just could never find the success to get over the hump and get to a finals and win a championship. Even though they had some good years, In 2003 to 2004, the Timberwolves were the #1 seed in the NBA, or actually I should say in the West. They won 58 games. Actually, they were the top seed in the NBA. They won 58 games, but they lost in the Western Conference Finals. That year they had Sam Cassell. I think in 2002 is when they had Chauncey Billups. Yeah, so Billups was there in 2002. And just by the way, slight change of location for the video just based on something went on downstairs. So now I'm in a different room of my house. But okay, continuing on. They were always they lost in the first round on the Timberwolves for about 6 or 7 straight years before that. Marbury could not gel with Garnett properly and demanded a trade. And then they got Terrell Brandon, who was okay, but not as good as they wanted him to be. His best years were behind him, and Chauncey Billups played good, but just wasn't the all-star that he would become in Detroit yet. And Sam Cassell was, really good, and they maxed out their potential, but they didn't get to the finals even. The next duo I have on here is one where it's actually more of a small shooting guard rather than a point guard, but pretty similar idea. One of the primary ball handlers on their team. It was John Starks and Patrick Ewing. Very good duo, but they never won the championship. They got to Game 7 of the NBA Finals and lost, which is unfortunate, but just the way it goes sometimes. And the next couple I have on here is Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire from 2004 to 2010 in Phoenix. Again, a really good duo, but just not good enough to get over the hump. They got to the Western Conference Finals 3 separate times and lost each time, never making the finals. The next team on here, I already mentioned Stockton and Malone, so we will skip by them. But the last team that I have on here is when the Phoenix Suns had the core of Kevin Johnson and Charles Barkley. They got to the finals 1 year and lost to the Bulls, and then they got to the second round, I think the year afterwards, and then the first round the next couple of years. So as you can see, between all of those, there's one I forgot, I'm sorry. Dirk Nowitzki and Jason Terry from around, I think it was 2004 through 2012 that we had those two guys together. And for all those years, they did end up winning 1 title in 2011. But, you would have expected them to win a few more considering that they did have another year where they got to the finals and another year where they won 67 games and were the 1 seed. And then just a team that was always winning 55-plus games, but just was never really achieving what you thought that they could, and they were always losing in the first or second round, which was disappointing. But I guess what I'm trying to get at with this video is that I don't think that this is the way to build a team. As I was reading off this list, between all of those combinations, which there were, let's see here. That was 12 different point guard big man combinations where they were like really good players and like both all-star level players, and they just didn't have success. And I think what I noticed between those 12 duos, they only had 3 titles, and I think that's really surprising in that you'd think that some of these duos, like you'd expect Jerry and Wilt Chamberlain to win more than 1 title together, or you'd expect Oscar and Kareem to maybe rattle off 3 championships, or people like Tim Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning to at least make a finals, which they didn't. Kevin Garnett to maybe make a finals with Sam Cassell or Stephon Marbury or Billups at some point, or Dirk to have more than 1 title. I would have expected him to have about 3. Steve Nash and Amari, you think, should have maybe won 2 titles. Stockton and Malone, I think, should have probably been able to eke out 1 of the 2 Bulls finals. And then Barkley and KJ, Kevin Johnson, I think could have won the 93 finals, but they just didn't perform to the best of their abilities. And Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp, I think that they really maxed out when they got to the finals the year that they did, so I'm not going to knock them really, but still a team that they decided were going to build around a point guard and a big man, and it didn't really work out as well as they wanted it to. They wanted to win a championship that year. And then Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, one of the most underachieving duos of all time, I'd say. You'd really expect them to get to the finals at least, or even at least the Western Conference Finals, and they did neither of those things. and just a very underwhelming era. Not compared to Clippers history, but compared to I think what was expected and what the rest of the league thought was going to happen. I think everyone thought that they would probably get to a finals at least, and they never did. So I guess what I'm going to get into is why I think that there is a key flaw in this makeup of a team. I think that teams often figure, well, basketball is based around having talented big men, because big men have an easier time scoring because they're bigger, they're closer to the rim, they don't have to do as much to score because they can just be down low. And I think that that is true in a way, but I don't think that pairing them with a point guard is best, because the point guard in a lot of scenarios can get squeezed. And I think I'll give an example here. In 2011, the Chicago Bulls based their playoff run around a point guard in Derrick Rose and then two big men in Carlos Boozer and Joakim Noah. So now if you have the opposing team, the Miami Heat, who they were facing, and you're looking at their big three, which is shooting guard, small forward, and power forward, you look at how much more flexibility the Heat had than the Bulls. Derrick Rose has to guard the other point guard for the Bulls, and with those traditional big men for the Bulls, you have to have them guard the power forward and the center. But for the Heat, Dwayne Wade could guard the point guard, shooting guard, or small forward. LeBron could guard any of the positions. Bosh could guard the 4 or the 5. So you had a scenario where they had LeBron James guarding Derrick Rose throughout a lot of that series, and then Wade could downshift to the small forward. Chalmers could guard the shooting guard, and then they'd be fine. But with a traditional lineup like that, it's a lot harder with just a big man and a small man to do those switches and have it be effective. Like, you could not have Chris Paul effectively switch onto a 6'7" shooting guard and expect him to guard him well. I don't know, let's think of, I would not expect Chris Paul to switch on to somebody like DeMar DeRozan and be able to match up with him okay, just because DeMar is 7 inches taller, and I don't think that Chris Paul could properly guard him. That's an example from today's game I was trying to think of. And I also think that in a lot of scenarios, smaller guys get worn down in the playoffs more because they get bullied a lot more because the refs allow the guys to play rougher and harder, so then the players get squeezed a bit more as far as just a lot of hard fouls, and it's rougher on small guys because they can't absorb as big of hits. But I do think that there is a way to make this work, but I think you have to have these two great players along with surrounding great players. I guess the example would be the Dirk Nowitzki and Jason Terry year. They had a good quality starter at every position. It wasn't like that they had those two and not much else. If you look at Stockton and Malone, they really didn't have much else besides those two guys. And you could say Jeff Hornacek was a really good player. I think he was essentially J.J. Redick in the 1990s. So however good you think J.J. Redick is on a championship caliber team, I don't know. But they really had nothing but those two guys. So, yeah, I just think the main theory is the point guard gets squeezed and he gets guarded by tougher guys in the playoffs because they switch to point guard. The defensive strategy is to switch a bigger guy, like a shooting guard or a small forward, onto the point guard, like the Derrick Rose and getting guarded by LeBron, or a lot of times in the playoffs, or in 2015, Steph Curry got guarded by LeBron a bit and struggled in that playoff series. I'm trying to think of other examples. Gary Payton, a lot of times in the 1996 finals, would be guarded by either Michael Jordan or Scottie, and a lot of times Ron Harper too, the Bulls point guard. But they had no problem, any of the three of them, guarding him because he was such an offensive threat, and they were all such good defenders that Jordan could guard the small forward if Pippen wanted to take the point guard and Peyton, and then Ron Harper would switch on to the shooting guard, Hershey Hawkins, and it wouldn't be any problem because they were all tall enough. But when you have the small point guard and the big man, you're really limited in that big man can't take the ball up himself necessarily. Wilt Chamberlain or Kareem or Garnett really could not take the ball down the court themselves and be a proficient ball handler, or Karl Malone, or a lot of these guys for that sake. So it all comes down to the point guard, and if they're getting squeezed by the defense and stretched out and they're being trapped or just nailed down by a really big defender and getting beat up a little bit because the playoffs are rougher, then they're going to have a harder time delivering the ball effectively, and they're going to be a lot less crisp with their passes and their assisting and their scoring. So I think what I'm boiling this message down to is that I don't think that style is as effective as the other style, which I would say it's having a dominant wing, like the Bulls had a wing in Michael Jordan. The Lakers, when they had Shaq, I didn't include the Shaq era on this because they had Kobe, who was a wing. The Warriors now have Durant as probably their best player, who is a wing. They have Steph, a little man too, but their other best player is a wing, so I'm not counting that. Any team LeBron's ever been on, he's been a wing and he's been the best player. In the 80s, I'm not going to count Kareem and Magic because Magic was 6'9", and to me that's not really a point guard. That's just a big guy that handles the ball. He had more of the body of a power forward like LeBron does, so he was really a wing. Larry Bird was a wing. Elgin Baylor in the 60s was a wing. You might be able to say that the Boston Celtics of the 60s had the big man, little man concept with Cousy and Bill Russell, but they also had John Havlicek, Hondo, who was one of the best small forwards ever. So I don't think that you can argue that they didn't have any good wings. They also had Sam Jones, who was Dwayne Wade, but with a jump shot. If you don't know who Sam Jones is, look him up. He's a phenomenal player in the 1960s. So I guess my message is I think that you need to have a good wingman to be a championship contender. I don't think this little man, big man concept is ever going to work successfully in the NBA. And I think Blake Griffin and Chris Paul are the prime example for a modern comparison today. They just are not as effective as other teams could be. Or they could be if they had a small forward. What was the thing that people are always saying about the Clippers? The only thing they're missing is a good small forward. Because I think you just need a wing scorer who can, in the clutch, get you a basket. Because if you don't have that, then your point guard is getting guarded by a bigger guy in the playoffs, typically a lot of times, unless you have a shutdown point guard defender. And so they can't get their shot off as easily. And if they can't get the ball to the big man as effective or as easily, then he's going to struggle to get a good shot off in the clutch moments too. You just need somebody who can take it on the wing, ISO, and score. It's not the style much anymore, but look at the best teams in the NBA. Last year, Cavaliers, they had LeBron, who could do that, just create his own offense. Warriors, Durant and Curry. Let's see here. Rockets, Harden. Westbrook, a big point guard. I'm not going to count him as small. He's 6'4", weighs 220. He's a big guard, so I'm not going to count him as a point guard. Honestly, he played shooting guard in college, and he only moved to point guard because he likes to handle the ball. So he's essentially a wing in my book who handles the ball a lot, even though he's technically point guard. So yeah, I just think that because of those reasons, because of the harder defense in the playoffs and the lack of creating their own shot, that this big man, little man concept will not be as effective in the NBA. And it never has been, and I don't think it ever will be. Thanks for your time, guys, and have a good night. Bye.